Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon, or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode. Hi, everybody. We have a new website up at www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com. That's www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com. So check it out. We're back with part 2 of our interview with Michelle Belanger. This short bonus episode focuses on vampires, the psychic kind. So keep the garlic in the cupboard. It's not going to save you. Enjoy.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Michelle Belanger is an author and occult expert most widely recognized for appearances on television's Paranormal State, exploring abandoned prisons and haunted houses while blindfolded and in high heels. A leading authority on psychic and supernatural topics, Michelle's nonfiction research in books like The Dictionary of Demons and The Psychic Vampire Codex has been sourced in television shows, university courses, and numerous publications around the world. In addition to acting as media liaison for fringe communities in the occult and paranormal world, Michelle's public world has spanned performing with gothic and music bands and designing immersive live-action gaming events for companies such as Wizards of the Coast. Michelle's new paranormal dark fiction series, the Shadow Side series, is published through Titan Books and begins with Conspiracy of Angels. Michelle resides near Cleveland, Ohio, with 3 cats in a library of more than 5,000 books. For more information on Michelle's work, go to www.michellebelanger.com. That's www.michellebelanger.com. Or on patreon.com/haunted. Now, the other side of the coin, besides demons, is vampires. And I'm kind of interested in that because I am not too far from Salem. I made a documentary, and a lot of it filmed in Salem, and I got to know a lot of people there. And one of the people that was on my show was a tour guide, and he talked about people on his tours that were vampires or self-proclaimed vampires, that there was a subculture there, he said, in Salem.
There was another case where there was a couple on the tour, the best guest we'd ever had. They were laughing, they were taking photographs, they were into it, they were nodding along until we got to the vampire content. And I noticed their whole mood shifted. They got really upset and angry. And as we were walking away, I took them aside and asked them what was the matter. Why were they upset all of a sudden? And they said the reason they got mad is that they were vampires. One of them was the vampire, the other was the donor. And they did not like the fact that we were publicly discussing them and acknowledging that they were a real thing. They said they wanted to remain in the shadows.
So could you tell us about how you learned about vampires, and are you one yourself? So what are they?
Okay, well, like I said, vampires were a very personal thing. So I grew up in this family where psychic abilities were, pretty normal and we could talk about them. But the one thing that was sort of taboo was when I started asking questions about how I personally related to energy. Really early on, I started to notice that I seemed to have the ability not only to perceive it and to sense it, but also to reach out and take it, to harness it, to pull it away from other people. I was a really sick little kid. I had open heart surgery twice, in and out of the hospital. And my I was supposed to die at age 5. They didn't correct everything.
Are you okay now? Are you totally recovered? Are you good now?
There's no warranty on my parts, but I was the first one in the hospital, and I think in my state, that survived what they did to repair my ventricular septal defect.
Wow.
And it was dodgy for a while. I was supposed to have my growth stunted and also have brain damage. And as I joke, since I'm about 6'1", 1 out of 2 ain't bad.
I'll have to edit out some of that laughter, but that's brilliant.
So to go back to it, I was a sick kid. I was an incredibly perceptive kid, and I sorted out pretty early on that if I wasn't feeling well, I seemed to be able to take something from the other people around me. I went so far as, and this is so terribly creepy in retrospect, and I can't undo it. So in first grade, I invented vampire tag, and I fully knew what I was doing. And this is the part where I say it's creepy and I can't undo it. Convince the other kids that we'd play vampire tag. I was the vampire. I would catch them. And if I, like tag you're it, but instead of tag you're it, I would catch them. I would feed off of them, which would usually involve me going full Frank Langella, behind them and, but not so much actually teeth biting their necks, actually by my perception, pulling life out of them. And that was a pretty weird thing for a first grader to be doing. Sorting out what that meant. What did you call that? Was that all in my head?
What did your Aunt Rita say about that? Did she know about that? Your aunt? What did she say about it?
I knew enough not to talk about that to Aunt Rita. Aunt Rita and I talked Nostradamus. We talked end times, apocalypse, Agamemnon. She was partly deaf, so it was always Acropolis and Agamemnon, not Apocalypse and Armageddon. She was a character. I talked about it with my grandmother a couple of times, and my grandmother got real weird. And I'm still not sure quite what to make of that completely. Although having met my grandfather, my grandmother's ex-husband, much later in life, I think she got weird because what I was describing was him.
Mm. Well, Belanger begins with Bella, like Bella Lugosi, so you never know.
I mean, you never know, but it was a significant part of my coming of age of going, I think I'm a vampire. And being enough of a folklore reading, mythology reading, egghead to be able to say, I know that I'm not undead. I'm not Dracula, but I think something that we're describing when we use the word vampire, I think there's a grain of truth to some of these stories. I think that there are people who need to take this vital energy. Now, again, it's the 70s and 80s. So the idea of vital energy is well outside of the realm of accepted everything at the time. It's going to be years before Reiki is a big deal, Tai Chi. Even yoga was still decried in the schools as satanic teaching. It's what started me reading so much comparative religion, because that was where I first went searching for, do other cultures believe that there is such a thing as vital energy? Because I knew I wasn't drinking blood, but it seemed like I was taking something essential from people. That took me to Hinduism, yoga, prana, which is their word for breath, life, and energy, over to traditional Chinese medicine, Shinto in Japan, the idea of qi and ki, again, this breath, this energy, this life force that is exchanged between people and plants and the world. And I was a goth by the time I was 14 also, which there was some crossover there because you could talk about vampires in that community and you could sort of explore the vampire as an identity in that community. But it was also something I was struggling with as a very real part of my daily experience. And then I found that there was a whole community. Like I was not the only person who A, had gone, hey, I think there's something vampiric about me. And B, this is a significant part of how I identify. This is who I am. There were people at the time who were witches, Wiccans and pagans and everything, and they were coming to their awareness of magic and energy through a slightly different path. And then there were all of us little black-clad haunters of goth clubs hanging out in the shadows, feeling this great affinity for spirits and the dead and sort of like between states. And all of the things that society, especially at that time, were telling us we're bad. We're automatically satanic. And we were finding revelation and finding meaning. And yeah, there's an extensive community around the world of folks who identify as vampires. I am the author of the primary set of ethics. So like if you're familiar with witches and Wiccans, they have the Wiccan Rede, and it harm none, do what thou, in word, thought, or deed, do what thou wilt.
Yeah.
I penned the Black Veil, which again, it's uber goth. Apologies for the edgelord wording. I didn't give the title. That was somebody else. But it's a set of ethical guidelines about only taking things with consent, about respecting people, about respecting who you're taking things from, about discretion with yourself.
So is that, you always find out they have to get permission to get into a house, is that kind of in line with that? And I also think it's what you just said, dark is in the eye of the beholder, vampire is kind of in the eye of the beholder too, right? It's kind of how it's perceived, and there are some misperceptions about it.
One thing I learned, I did my undergrad work on shamanism in world cultures. And I'm going to say this, not that anybody who's in the vampire culture or subculture is a shaman, but if we had access to the concept of shamanic experience, the idea of a mystical death and rebirth, the wounded healer, a walker between, a lot of that would probably have been reframed for us. And I'm not sure that all of us would have hit on the word vampire as an identity, because there's something very essentially shamanic in how we are called, how we become, how we awaken, what our experiences are. And consent is a huge part of it. Now, that's not to say that people are bound to take only with permission. One of the main reasons I became an advocate within the community, as well as a media liaison for the community for many, many years, is there are bad elements who have these abilities and they don't choose to be good about them. There are folks who are vampiric who will take from people without their permission. They are in the minority, but they are out there. And more than that, though, are people who are not fully aware of what they are or what they're doing. And those were the ones that I felt the need to speak to first, to say this is a thing that exists. It is tied in with psychic abilities and psychic perceptions. I have described it as a flavor of psychic. Like I say psychic vampire because you can't take the psychic out of it. Like I have to be perceptive of that energy if I'm going to be able to take it and move it and manipulate it. There are a lot of folks who are vampiric and just don't realize it. And they're probably the most dangerous to themselves and others because they work off of instinct, pure and simple. They have a need, they do things to fill it. Sometimes just pushing strong emotional reactions in people, sometimes getting really, really like very either domineering and kind of aggressive to pull from arguments and negative interactions, or kind of clingy, like I call them old Aunt Agnes, the sort of people who just like tell you a billion and one terrible things going on in their life and they just suck the life out of you while they're having that conversation.
You hear that a lot. You hear that person's an energy vampire. Oh my God, I just felt my energy sucked out of me. Is there a type of person that a psychic vampire is attracted to, a person that vibrates higher, a person who is more susceptible and lower? And what type of person is if you can be generalized, is a psychic vampire attracted to or would be, more lean toward for their energy?
I mean, the ideal pairing is someone who has more than they need. And one of the neat things was talking with a first generation Chinese American. I was doing field research to go, so I haven't found any good books on Chinese vampires, like what's vampirism like in your culture. And they were just like, well, first of all, like we don't really have the same language. And especially for what you're talking about with living vampires, we don't have that concept at all because you either have high chi or you have low chi, and it's not a big deal. People who have low chi just share chi with people who have high chi. So basically, it's the same concept. If you are someone who operates on an energy deficit, we don't have a better word here than vampire. That's sort of the tool we've been handed. And you find people who have more than enough to spare. And at that point, you find a balance between you.
Do you just have a higher metabolism and you use more energy, hence you need more from other people, do you think? Or is there kind of a metabolism thing that drives that? Or is it just something more innate that we don't know what it is?
There are a lot of theories within the community, and a higher metaphysical metabolism is a very tempting one. I would certainly say that seems to be part of it for me. A lot of folks who are vampiric also have additional chronic health issues, and they seem to be Here's sort of the combination that seemed to occur for me. Definitely a much higher psychic or metaphysical metabolism, but also a lot of severe physical ailments and limitations, which as an early psychic and early energy worker, I learned instinctively how to counterbalance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if like you had those heart surgeries early on, maybe it was a self-preservation thing too, where you needed to learn, to keep your energy levels high and to keep yourself vital.
I think that definitely played a role in it. I was certainly a fighter from the get-go. I did survive against all odds. I died a couple of times and have confirmation about that from my mom. Bless her heart, at one point when I tried to confirm that, she was like, "Oh, which time, honey?" And I'm like, which surgery? No, which time that you died on the table, because there were a couple.
Oh my God.
No wonder you were a hot mess, you 20-something single mom.
Oh, that's funny. That's incredible. I mean, I could go on this. Is there, are you allowed to say, are there certain places, can you say yes or no that Salem is definitely a strong place for a vampires subculture? Have you been there? Are you familiar with it? Or?
Yeah. I know a bunch of people from there. A couple who are out, and quite a few more who are just living their lives, being themselves. There's a lot more folks in the community than I think most people would be comfortable knowing. At one point in the heyday, there were thousands just in New York City alone active in the community. And it's not just random club kids. These are people who I know in a whole lot of different walks of life. I can rattle off doctors and nurses and lawyers. And if I start describing some other professions, I might accidentally out some people. But there's some who are very much out about it, and I'm one of them. But there's a whole lot of folks.
You'd almost think Reiki masters would be vampires in a way, because they move around energy. What about this whole past year in COVID? Has that put a damper and created a hunger for more energy because so many people are quarantined and not out? Did this past year affect you and other people that are psychic vampires?
I've actually ended up having to do a lot of help with folks troubleshooting. If you're an energy vampire and you rely on taking energy from people, especially directly, what do you do? Much like Reiki, it is possible to do this over a distance. Most of the folks who identify as vampires don't necessarily harness that skill as much as maybe they could, partly because consent is such a big deal for most of the folks who are active in the community. I've been doing a lot of workshops and one-on-one, showing people and walking them through the steps and how to either feed ambiently or how to kind of boost their ability to feed from a willing donor from a distance, and working with building networks like that. Because the isolation has really wrecked a bunch of people.
Does someone know that they're being fed on by a psychic vampire? Are they aware, or is it something that they're tired the next day? They go to bed early or something. Are they aware at all? Or
I think it's pretty noticeable. The other side of the coin, of course, is that I teach people psychic self-defense, and it's signs of psychic attack. Somebody feeding off of you is going to be parsed as psychic attack. First of all, it's almost always going to be somebody that you interacted with in the past 10 to 15 minutes. most people, like I said, especially the ones who are unconscious vampires, don't have a good handle on taking energy from a distance. So it's going to be either through like physical contact, like they just had a conversation with you, or they're at least in line of sight. And you'll feel a little dizzy, maybe a little breathless, certainly like suddenly lethargic, drained. There's usually, especially when it is done against a person's will, a sense of violation. It is an intense and overwhelming sensation. I should make as a side note, in a lot of paranormal experiences, spirits can feed off of people as well. So a lot of the attacks that people will describe in hauntings are very similar, if not identical, to having a psychic vampire feed off of you without your permission. If somebody's preying off of you, it's going to be very similar to a spirit preying on you. So like I said, when it's a living human person who has this ability, it's probably somebody you interacted with directly within the past 10 to 15 minutes. They probably can still see you and therefore focus on you. And if they are unconscious about what they're doing, the best thing you can do is to just, if you feel this, remove yourself from whatever room you're in, from wherever you're at with people. Isolate yourself if you can, like nip into the bathroom or something. Take a few moments to do a check to make sure, like, this isn't a panic attack. This isn't low blood sugar. Like this isn't a stroke. Like, I'm actually physically okay. No, this is, check in. And then go through like grounding, centering, shielding, run your hands under some cool water, just sort of like calm down, do a little breathing, reset your boundaries and your shields, and close it off.
Can you take energy from like residual energy, not just from human beings, but from like if you go to a haunted location? Can you pull energy from there or from a ghost there? Or is that something, it has to be from the living person? It's that type of energy that you need.
That's actually a fantastic point because yes, ambient energy and ambient feeding is a sort of free range feeding that isn't taking anything directly from a person.
I love that term, free range feeding. It's so awesome. It's great.
If you think of people like candle flames, there's, actually sticking your finger in the flame and taking a little bit of the fire, or there's taking a little bit of the heat and the light that is naturally put off by the candle, and ambient energy is that. And residual hauntings come from that. Especially intense emotional experiences really increase that energy and the quality that it leaves behind in a space. So yes, it's possible to take the energy that is no longer attached to people, but has come from people, that is left behind in spaces. Not everyone in the vampire community learns to or has an inclination to be able to basically like take the energy from places once it's stayed for a very long time. Basically, not everybody can eat the energy in a haunted location, but it's entirely possible. And it's also something that makes me a really good investigator, as well as someone who can resolve a lot of haunting situations. I've got a natural ability to perceive the energy, to interact with it, to clear it out. Sometimes it involves snacking on it.
Yeah. Wow. So that's one other. And I don't want to take your trade secrets or anything, but what if someone's sleeping? Can you astral project? Is that a good time when someone's sleeping and they're not aware? Is that like if more advanced psychic vampires have the ability, is that a good time to go and take energy from someone?
Yeah, dreamwalking is a fantastic way of doing it. And the one downside with dreamwalking is it's something that can happen spontaneously, even if in the waking world you're someone who likes to make choices about when and how you feed. For myself, I do a lot of dream work, and I have a tight-knit group of people where I have basically standing permission, because if I were to get particularly low, there's certain people that I'm likely to show up to first. And I personally, for my own ethics, like them to know and be able to say yes ahead of time, just in case something like that would happen.
What about silly things like, maybe it's not silly. Do psychic vampires actually drink blood as like maybe a ritual? Does that do anything? And is garlic, if I feel like my energy is being drained, do I take some garlic and put it on my garlic bread or something? Does that have any bearing at all?
Well, garlic's easy. I love it. So I don't think that that's going to help anything at all.
All right. I'll draw you.
All
right.
Within the vampire community, there are psychic vampires. There are sanguine vampires. They're hybrids. There are a number of different ways in which to get human vital energy. And so a psychic vampire is somebody who is taking it through psychic means, Basically, think of it like reverse Reiki. But there are folks who do take small amounts of blood. Some sanguine vampires take the blood as sort of a focal point for the vital energy that they're taking. There are some folks in the vampire community who identify as medical sanguines or med-sang, which is to say that they don't really believe in the vital energy aspect. Like the psychic stuff isn't their thing. They think that there is a physical need that they have for physical blood. And it's a much more medical approach to things, obviously something that requires consent and comes with a fair amount of risk.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I could go on all night with this, so I'll just kind of wrap up. But wow. So, Michelle, give me a quick soundbite of some of the books that you're best known for. Let's start with the Psychic Vampire Codex. Let's talk about that.
Okay, so the Psychic Vampire Codex was the book that I set out to publish first. There were a lot of other options, but because coming to understand what vampire meant for me and what that identity was and how integral it was to my perception of energy and my experience as a psychic being, I knew that there were other people out there who were going through the same journey and probably had the same questions. And there was no book. Like, it was the most frustrating thing, struggling in the dark as a teen and just angsting over this whole thing. So I wrote the Psychic Vampire Codex for other folks who were vampiric like me to understand, what is this ability? What do you do about it? What are the ethics behind it? How do you feed? What is energy? What does it do? Dream walking is in there, the different ethical, the way to take ambient energy, what it's like when you're taking energy from a person, how to do that safely, how to do that in a way that actually enriches both parties. It is my vampire handbook, basically. God, the first version was written in 1994, if you can believe it, like forever ago in the Stone Age.
You can update that? Has that been updated recently, like your Dictionary of Demons? Is that one going to have a refresh, or has it had a refresh?
It got a refresh. So there's a version called, so the original one was just called the Vampire Codex, and that was published in 94 and again in 2000. And then as the Psychic Vampire Codex, it was published by Weiser in 2004. And that was the version that got a big update. And I added a whole bunch of stuff on healing and energy work and where vampirism intersects with that. I haven't really felt the need to update it since then. Like, it accomplishes exactly what I needed it to accomplish. There's a version of it that is free forever, as long as the site exists, on sacred-texts.com. And that is the version a little closer to the 2000 edition.
Do people in the vampire subculture, is there a portion that's like, Michelle, stop writing these books, we don't want people to know about us? Or do they pretty much embrace you doing this?
Oh, there's definitely folks who wish I would shut the heck up. Yeah. And especially when I was getting it published back in, when the Weiser edition came out in 2004, it did not make me popular among certain groups. There are some folks who like the idea of the vampire archetype, as well as like all the ooky spooky, like kind of like power and dominance that goes with it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed, but I like to take a big old pin and stick that right in it.
Well, good for you, man. That's awesome. Let's talk about real quickly the Dictionary of Demons. Did you recently update that from maybe a decade ago with some great new stuff?
Yeah. So the Dictionary of Demons came out in 2010, and that one I needed to update only because there's been so much good research and great academic stuff that's come out since then. So I recently came out with the 10th anniversary edition. It's got, I forget how many more pages. At this point, it's like 500 pages of book. Like, it's a big, meaty tome, and probably another 200 demon names in it at minimum.
It's like the phone book of demons. If I ever get possessed, I'll pull that out, and I'll be able to know. I go through the list and find who has me encumbered. You know.
Yep, a regular who's who of hell. Little bits exploring, like, what does demon mean, and demons, jinn, same thing. Who knows? It's also where I really got to like dig back into my academic background, and just, they let me put in as many citations as I wanted. So
that's awesome. Yeah, there's 3 other books real quickly I just want to cover. One is The Ghost Hunter's Survival Guide.
The Ghost Hunter's Survival Guide is pretty much my book on psychic self-defense for folks who are psychic practitioners, for folks who take a more theological approach, as well as for folks who have more of a psychological approach to things. I try to speak to all of those experiences. I wrote that as an answer to when we were doing investigations for Paranormal State, again and again and again, folks needed to figure out how to protect themselves, how to clear stuff, how to protect their kids, and how to assess whether or not a haunting was dangerous. And that is what that book is for.
Awesome. And then you did one based on your personal experiences called Haunted Experiences.
Haunting Experiences was, I think close to 15 years ago. It's technically now out of print. So I will be updating it, probably turning it into an audiobook. And I do have a Haunting Experiences 2 that I've been slowly working on. The one thing that held that up was the production company never, ever released any of the stuff for Paranormal State. Like, there's so many good stories that I wanted from behind the scenes, and I've just been trying to negotiate.
And the last one is for people who aren't vampires, but they still need psychic energy, the Psychic Energy Codex.
There were so many energy workers and psychics who read the Psychic Vampire Codex and found useful stuff in it, but who were like, but this vampire thing is not my jam. So I wrote the Psychic Energy Codex as both a prequel and a companion to the Psychic Vampire Codex. If you are an energy worker, if you are trying to develop your psychic abilities and your perceptions, if you're trying to build objectivity and learn how to harness those abilities, that is your workbook. It is the culmination of the classes that I was teaching and have been teaching for years. It has journaling and workbook stuff in it as well. So it's basically my main psychic development tome.
And your website, I'm going to pronounce it like Belanger, even though it's Belanger, so it's easier. It's michellebelanger.com, correct?
Yeah.
MICHELLEBELANGER.com. And that's where they can find out all the cool stuff you have, get your books and all the other great things that you do, right?
Yep. And easier to remember. I teach classes, and you can access pretty much all of my content and a huge community of other like-minded folks on my Patreon. And that one's super easy, patreon.com/haunted.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing time with us tonight.
Thank you so much. This has been fun.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout-out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.